to the Activation Podcast, brought to you by the Conscious Resistance Network. I'm your host, Derrick Bros. With every episode of The Activation, we will be bringing you solutions in the areas of health, decentralized technology, permaculture, spirituality, and hidden truths. The Activation Podcast is focused on bringing cutting-edge solutions to empower humanity. Hey everyone, this is Derrick Bros with the Conscious Resistance Network, and today I am checking in with an old friend, somebody who I imagine most of you know her work, have seen her work, writing or viral videos over the years. Somebody who is, I think, also one of the few to remain consistent and sane and principled over the years. Of course, I'm talking about Carey Wedler. Carrie, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to talk to you. I feel like there's so much to talk about. You and I, we keep up with each other offline, but I think this is actually the first time we've done an interview together of all the 10 years plus that we've known each other to actually just talk this way.
I think it is, which is very funny because we've worked together. We've, it's been this long.
So it's long overdue. And there's just a lot that I want to get into. But, as usual, before we go real deep, just in case anybody hasn't come across your work yet, whether that's with, anti-media or something prior or what you're doing now on Substack, maybe you can just give us a little bit of background on what your work's about, where you started, and what you're focusing on today.
Yeah, so I got started quite a long time ago when I think back on it, and I was a big Obama supporter when I was a lot younger, and I thought that he was anti-war. I took him at his word with his campaign rhetoric, and like a lot of people, I was very disappointed when I saw that he had no intention of keeping those promises, and that led me down a path to listening to Ron Paul and hearing the message of freedom, and then I got really into Ron Paul, getting him elected, and then of course that didn't work, and I started to question the system more deeply and start to think like, I wonder if anyone who's truly a challenge to the system will ever be able to gain power within it, and that led me down a path of voluntarism and anarchism and really challenging what I believe to be indoctrinated biases that I learned in public school about the virtues of government and democracy. And I started making YouTube videos. I started for Ron Paul, and then I started making them more about the philosophy and current events, which led me to the anti-media. And we were quite a large independent news organization. We were deleted, censored, purged back in the great purge of 2018, right before the midterms, which is pretty devastating for all of us. You included, you were writing for us at the time. You were one of our best journalists. So ever since, I keep making my videos, and I try to stay with it, even though I'm sure you can relate. It's a burnout to be so invested in what's going on in the world and to have such a minority belief about how the world could be run or should be run or should not be run, and so it's along that path, which that's perfect. That leads to something else I knew I wanted to mention, which I have also learned through the years that it's very important to take care of your spiritual and emotional mental health, which I didn't know when I first started making videos. So over the years, I started doing a lot more self-care, like meditation, yoga, ways to ground and really connect to myself and find balance within myself, because I think I think we talked about a lot about that. We're not going to have a free, peaceful world. We could have all the material solutions. We could have no government at all. And my concern is that it would just evolve back into all the reactivity that so colors statism, because if we're not taking care of ourselves and we're not calm and present in ourselves and aware of what we're putting out into the world, then we're going to stay in these cycles, which I think the status system really feeds off. So that's become a big part of my life as well. And I talk about it more on my new Substack, which I launched back in October. So I do an article a week, and I'm really loving it. I'm coming back to writing, which I kind of forgot about when we lost the anti-media because I was so devastated to lose something I loved so much. It was my dream job. So I'm happy to be back writing again. And I just filmed a bunch of videos actually today. I was taking some time off and traveling. So I'm happy to be back at it because there's a lot going on.
So thanks for sharing all that. One of the things that comes to mind as you share your history, and we both share a belief in voluntarist philosophy and have for years and have written about it and talked about it and tried to show other people why we think this is the best route forward. But I find in my experience that those who are voluntarist or principled anarchists, whatever they may label themselves, libertarians, we're still the vast minority, at least from what I see. Like I see this broader freedom online international community. You got the conspiracy researchers, you got the freedom-minded people who might not be of one philosophy or the other. And even now there's people, I'd say, who are awake again in the Trump years, who are more left-leaning, et cetera. But it still seems like with all these different perspectives and views that the anarchists, the voluntarists are the minority, and that there's, I guess, just a lot of the broader community that's still only exclusively focused on the problems. Like I write a lot about the problems and report on it, but to me, it always comes back to that root of like, we have to, eventually get people to recognize that that's the deeper problem. But again, it feels like that's still a minority of people who are having those conversations. What do you see?
I think you're very correct, unfortunately, to a certain extent. It's interesting to be in a broader crowd of the anti-establishment, the questioning the system people, and then it's really maddening to see them get stuck in the same loops of like, well, we just have to elect the right people. We just need to do this with government. We need that kind of government. And I don't blame them. We're all at our own point in our evolutions. I just hope that evolution continues. But I also will say that I think that since so much of our work is online, it's easy to get caught up in what we see people posting online. When in my experience in real life, when I talk to people, even if they don't use the label anarchist or voluntarist, there's a very deep intuitive sense that this is not a sustainable system. And it's not even necessarily, well, we need a different kind of government, but there's a very deep understanding that it's not working and that maybe it's never worked. And so that does keep me hopeful. And I don't need them to call themselves any one thing. I don't need to hear the label. It's enough that there are people who fundamentally see that this is exploitative. The entire system is built on theft and coercion and violence. And maybe they wouldn't use those words, but there's an understanding that the system was not built to serve the most of humanity. And so that does keep me hopeful. And I think that especially as the Trump years go on, I'm already seeing a lot of MAGA people questioning it. Does that mean they're going to, evolve toward our point of view? Maybe not, but I think that there's a lot of fertile ground for us to work with and hopefully change some hearts and minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to say that I've given up on voluntarism or anarchism, because definitely not in the terms of like how I try to live my personal life. But I do feel like I am, whether you want to say less optimistic or more realistic about the potential for converting the world, if that ever was a possibility. But I definitely think 10, 12 years ago, I was a lot more like starry-eyed about like, it's going to happen. We're almost there. We're going to reach everybody. And now I'm not so optimistic on that because of everything you just described, people continuing to fall for statism and fall for the same old tricks. And of course, and this sort of brings me to the next question, I do try to practice some level of empathy and compassion for those people. I know we've talked about this because, besides just day-to-day people trying to make a lot of people living check to check and inflation and debt and all this stuff, there's also the largest psychological operations that we've ever experienced, whether that's through mass media or algorithmic control on social media, that there's a lot to overcome to even get to the point of really being able to question and think about things on a deeper level. And I love that that's another area that you and I have bonded over the years, is just the focus on the internal side of things and the spiritual aspect. And so I'm, again, grateful that you've continued to communicate that. And I guess my question is the same. Do you have any more, in the same way with like anarchism, do you have any more optimism or less than you did, say, 10 years ago, that there is a movement towards spiritual awareness, spiritual development, just individual personal sovereignty?
I do. I think it's very slow, and I think it's going to be generational. What you were just saying, I think a huge piece of the propaganda working and the system working and people giving away their power and their agency to politicians seeking power and bureaucrats and whatever, just the expectation that somebody's going to come and fix everything and make it okay. And so you don't have to be afraid and you don't have to be, XYZ anxious or whatever anymore. You have to be angry anymore at the system. I think a part of the reason that works so effectively is that in general, people are pretty disconnected. They're pretty ungrounded. They don't have a strong connection to themselves or spirit. And most of us, it's not our fault. We didn't grow up with parents who could teach us that because they didn't grow up with parents who could teach us that. And it goes so far back. And I think that such a huge part of this evolution is going to require a turning toward, which I think is really happening in our generations and younger generations. Not all of them, because, oh my God, my feeds are a little bit distressing in terms of how I see people. It's just people who want to be loved. When I think about it, I can judge them. I can judge what they do for attention and their insecurities, but it comes down to a fundamental feeling, I think, of unworthiness and not enoughness. And this is passed down, and it's really heartbreaking. But I do think that more people, however, slowly are seeking that out because it's unsustainable. That's what it was for me, is I just couldn't live like that anymore. I was so anxious. I was so stressed. I was, name anything. I was that. You can watch my earlier videos and my face kind of contorts with rage. I'm I still get fired up, don't get me wrong. And I still get angry. And I think that's a healthy response to so much injustice and violence in the world. But I think it's part of a broader evolution that is going to happen simply because it's not sustainable. And that's kind of how I feel about the statism too. It's like at some point you're not going to have a choice but to seek out other options of being and living and coexisting with other people, because the way it is right now, it's not getting us anywhere, and it's becoming increasingly apparent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I want to talk to you about some of the issues of the day and get your thoughts on them. But before we do that, I'd like to see if you can share any of your personal practices or things that you've done because I know you've shared some with me over the years, but just anything you'd like to share publicly that has been useful for you in regards of what you were describing. Like, people who are, whether they realize it or not, really just looking for self-love, and they're looking externally through all sorts of other things. Like you mentioned, social media feeds is, of course, one of the most obvious ways. Like, there's going to be people hearing this who might be resistant to this. I mean, I know they'll be resistant. It's funny because my audience is such a mix of people who are spiritually aware and Christian and this and that, and then others who are just like, oh God, more hippie bullshit. Like, and just probably those are the people who need it the most, like, but they don't want to hear it. They don't want to tune in. So you right now who's listening to this and resistant, Carrie, what would you offer them?
Oh, there's so many things. And I've had like quite a long journey. And I came from a very heavy place, I'll say, where I was like completely dysregulated and just having a really hard time existing and like doubting my own value and worth, which is still something I'm working on. Like, I don't want to frame it as like I figured it out and now I am perfectly happy and perfectly grounded and spiritual. I don't think anyone is. And I distrust anyone who presents it that way, because usually the ones who are, like, they don't need to talk about it and advertise it. That's a tangent though. So the first thing that worked for me was yoga. And I know a lot of people are like, hippie stuff, and I'm not flexible, I can't do yoga. I promise you, if you're not flexible, yoga is for you. And what I love about it too is that the philosophy in a lot of ways mirrors our values. It's about persuasion over force. It's not jamming your body into a pose that you can't get into because you might injure yourself. It's like, be respectful of your body and listen to your body and get in tune with yourself. I know that not everyone is into yoga, and that's fine. Meditation was a big one too. And meditation does not have to be just, sitting still and whatever you imagine to be the stereotype of yoga and Eastern meditation. It doesn't have to be that way. There's so many different forms. There's breath work, which can be quite intense, but also really beneficial. That was a big one for me. But I will say, I didn't even know the depths of my nervous system dysregulation until I started doing a program last year that uses neuroplasticity to rewire your brain. So I actually was so stressed and so anxious my whole life that I ended up with a chronic illness, which I laugh now because I'm getting better, but like it was not funny. I mean, no, it wasn't really that funny. I'm trying to find a way that it's funny. It really wasn't. It was very difficult. It was like kind of autoimmune adjacent, and it came after a really stressful period, and my body just started like deteriorating. And I don't want to disrespect people who deal with true debilitation, because I was not debilitated, but pretty much every system in my body was malfunctioning, and all my labs were normal, of course, which is really common these days. And the doctors were like, well, I don't know how to help you. And I don't think I would have taken a Western solution anyway, but they didn't even have one. So I found this program, and it basically helps you calm down your limbic system and your fight or flight response, because the premise is that when we get caught in fight or flight, of course, non-essential systems in your body that you don't need to survive, like a tiger or a huge natural disaster, like the proper use of fight or flight, everything else gets deprioritized and systems start to go haywire. And that's exactly what happened with me. And just for an example, I had chronic migraines, food sensitivities, fatigue. Sometimes I'd go to work out and I'd get there and I'd be like, I can't. And I would just go home. And I thought I was just lazy or tired. But in retrospect, I'm like, no, I had limbic system impairment. And then I realized I made a lot of progress, and then I kind of stalled out. And I realized I needed to address my anxiety, the actual stress, like what is putting me into such a state of dysregulation. And when I started rewiring that, I felt so much better. And again, it's going to be a lifelong practice for me, but if you're curious, if you just look up brain rewiring, neuroplasticity, you can find all kinds of different programs. The one I did is called the dynamic neural retraining system. It's a commitment. So I think you have to be at a place of like, I have no hope. I'm hopeless. I thought I was just going to get sick and die. Honestly, like I had given up hope that I had done everything. I had done all the cleanses, all the protocols, and nothing worked. And that changed life. And so I'm almost done with the program now. I'm so much healthier today. All my symptoms, I'd say, are like 90% better. I'm kind of just like tying up the odds and ends now. And I want to share this with everyone because I think it's a really under not research, because stress and its relation to illness is actually quite well researched, but I don't hear much about this in the Make America Healthy Again movement. And it's important to talk about the foods and the chemicals. Like, this is a huge part of what I care about, but I realize now that for me, it was both. It was growing up on the American food system and the stress. And I'm not sure that I would have gotten sick without both of those factors.
Yeah. Do you mind saying the name of the program again? It cut out just a little bit when you were saying it.
Yeah, it's the Dynamic Neural Retraining System. And it was made by a woman who, she was just chronically ill and she was bedridden. And so she started researching neuroplasticity, and she made up a program based on what she learned about how to harness neuroplasticity, how to heighten neuroplasticity in your brain, which psychedelics do that actually, which is another form of healing. We don't have to get super into it. But basically she figured out how to really bolster her neuroplasticity and then retrained her brain to not have such a dramatic response to things that were really not that harmful.
Well, since you mentioned psychedelics, what ways have they been helpful for you? I mean, I know that you've had some experimentation. You don't need to share anything you don't feel comfortable, but is that something that you feel like was part of? I think you were kind of alluding to it already, but I definitely know that in addition to meditation and other forms for myself, that there was sometimes having a strong dose of psychedelics, like, put me in a mindset that I wasn't able to kind of like, just from a different perspective, I wasn't seeing, right? Or like really just getting out of my own self and then like looking at everything and like, oh my God, what am I doing here? What have been your sort of experiences with psychedelics?
Yeah, so I haven't done a heroic dose. I'll fully disclose that. I intend to when I'm done. I don't want to mess with my brain too much right now because I'm still in my healing state. And I think it would probably help, but I'll get there soon. But from the experiences I have had, I think the two biggest takeaways were one, connecting to the oneness, remembering that I'm not separate. I'm actually connected, and we are all connected, even people I dislike, even politics, because I can't stand them. Like, there is a source energy that I think permeates the whole universe, and psychedelics definitely helped me feel that and connect to it. And then in doing so, it has allowed me to observe a lot of my issues, a lot of the things I've struggled with take a step back and not be so identified with them and so attached to them, and actually do it with love and kindness. It's like, oh, of course you do XYZ. Of course you feel this way. Of course this happens. It's okay. I don't need to push you away. I don't need you being like, let's say, an inner child or, a certain dynamic or anxiety or fear or whatever, anger. And being able to sit with that in a much more compassionate way instead of judging myself or trying to numb myself out of it. Psychedelics have been really helpful in helping me do that practice. Awesome.
Yeah, I definitely encourage people to safely and with the right people, if they choose to experiment, go down that road. And it's just, to me, it's like another topic that in the broader freedom space, that there are people who, again, like, not everybody is, I guess, a libertarian, voluntarist minded person. And clearly that's not the only person that I think we would be willing to work with, but I do think it makes a difference, because other people who care about freedom, sometimes like that means to them, that doesn't always extend to like, well, you have the freedom to put what you want in your body, even if I don't agree with it, right? They might be like, oh, just more drug talk. These people are just talking about using substances or whatever. And I think that's, it's obviously it's changed a lot around the world, but there still are a lot of people, I think, who hold on to those things. And not to say everybody needs to take psychedelics or anything like that, but just to recognize that there is a difference. And of course, that even within that space, I spent a lot of time abusing psychedelics, and looking back, I definitely I did not come with the respect that these very powerful medicines deserve. And they taught me some lessons either way, but there was a different way to go about it. So hopefully more people will continue to open up to that, because I do think ultimately, the healing aspect is just going to continue to be so important, no matter who's president, no matter how difficult things get. And I definitely think we're heading in some pretty dangerous directions, that it's still going to be important for us to try to keep ourselves as centered and balanced as possible, and probably even more so as things get crazier, right?
Yeah. And I just want to add to that, especially when you're putting it in the context of what's happening in the world. I didn't do psychedelics for quite a while, and I'll name it. Like, I was afraid. I was afraid of what might come up. I didn't want to see some darker parts of me. I didn't want to risk that something might, I didn't want to go there. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people, whether they're conscious of it or not. And I don't want to speak up from like condescension that I know how people feel or I know their inner world, but just you look at the world, there's a lot of fear. And fear is like really the core emotion under so much other reactivity, you know, the anger and the blame and the resentment and the bitterness. I think that all underlying that is fear. And I'm not surprised then that I think a lot of people are too scared to do psychedelics. I'm still afraid to do a heroic dose. Like I'm going to do it at some point, but like it is scary. It's scary to turn toward those things. And it sort of mirrors the world we see right now, where most things run on fear. People rule through fear. They get support through fear because people just want that fear to go away. It's scary. Nobody wants to feel afraid. And yet it's also like a really basic human emotion that I don't think we have to run away from it. I think the more we can turn toward it kind of paradoxically, like the more it dissipates and the less control it has over us.
Absolutely. You have to be prepared to kind of consider the potential that maybe you're not in control, whether that's for a couple of hours just on some psychedelics or just in the bigger picture of life, recognizing how little, you know, we have certain things in our realm of control, and we should do what we can to empower ourselves through those things. But at the end of the day, there's also much that is beyond our control. And, you know, it's like, again, for me, that's like such a balance and a challenge with the work, because I write articles on a semi-weekly basis, produce video reports, do all the things and all the things that you've done over the years. And still we want to try to find that peace within and find that balance. And it's just like this push and pull of like wanting to try to communicate ideas to the world and help other people, and being stressed out in the process often by watching. I mean, we send each other messages like, oh my God, are you seeing this thing? And so that, but then also like, okay, I got to pull back. I got to like, you know, let go of I don't have to debate every idiot on Twitter. I don't have to respond to every comment here and there. Yeah, it can be a challenge. And I definitely don't think I succeed all the time. But I think it's just important to have that as your kind of your North Star, your guiding values, so that you can just keep coming back to that when you do get off track a little bit, and just bring yourself back to center, whether that's like what I'm discussing here, debating people online, the stress of being a journalist or an activist, or just the daily stresses of life, traffic, dealing with family, etc. It's like still so vital to just bring ourselves back to that center and try to find some peace. Does that work for you often, or do you still follow yourself? Like, is this like a daily struggle?
It's both, like it's a struggle. And I think especially after losing the anti-media, that was very disheartening and disillusioning. And is that a word, disillusioning? There was a lot of disillusionment for me. And and it wasn't just about losing anti-media, because, as I was mentioning with the intergenerational stuff, when I got real with myself, it wasn't just about losing this passion project that I had. There were like deeper themes of like not being heard and feeling like my voice isn't welcome. And like it triggered like such a deep well of deeper trauma within me that in a way I'm grateful, because it made me face that and sit with it. That's a little bit of a tangent, but it's stressful. And I don't know if it's designed to be stressful, but the nature of the system is stressful. And even if you're opposing it, and even if you see through it, to engage with it is stressful. To go online, to post the things that we want to post. Social media is not good for anxiety levels and for stress and peace. And it's designed to keep you hooked. It's designed to keep you in an addicted state. And so for me, it's very important to really take time off and to step away and to not check my phone. And I think I do it too much, honestly. Like I have too many, like it's an extreme pendulum swing where I go from like editing a video for 48 hours straight and getting it posted, and then I just burn out and I don't make a video for a month. So that's not sustainable. I'm still trying to find the best way for me that serves my nervous system and my well-being best, but still honors what I feel is a really innate drive to talk about these things, to speak out, to, I've been doing this, oh my God, like 13 years now. Like it's hard to even believe I've still been doing it, but it's because I take breaks. Honestly, I think if I had just gone full bore the whole time, I don't think I'd still be here doing it. So in a way, I'm grateful for my burnouts, because my body just is like, nope, you have to take a break.
Forces you to take the break, whether you're going to take it or not. Yeah. And that's so important. I definitely do that yo-yo from time to time as well. So I try to get better at that. Well, you mentioned writing with Anti-Media, and then of course you're on Substack now at Pleasure to Burn is your Substack, and you've got a lot of great posts here. You started posting just in the last 6, 7, 8 months, in October?
I launched it in October. And just as a note, Pleasure to Burn is from the first line of Fahrenheit 451. if you've read it. It's when the main
I love that.
character is, he's, I think the first sentence is, "It was a pleasure to burn," it's before he goes through his transformation. But the book has so many themes about fire, and it's not just destruction. So that's why I went with that title.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So, I mean, I'm just looking through your posts, and for me, it's like things that I've become used to seeing you over the years, like a bit of like reporting on things going on in the world from your perspective, and then sort of what we're touching on here, like this one, staying sane in an insane world. But the one that caught my mind that I wanted to talk about just in terms of current events is this one you did a few weeks back called "The Peace President Strikes Again." And this is a common meme that we have seen repeated around, right, over and over, then prior to the election, and still, I mean, maybe not so many people are saying it anymore, but now they've moved the goalpost to "this is what I voted for." Like, I didn't ever think he was a peace president, but walk us through this a little bit about what you're focused on. You mentioned the signal leaks in the subheading there. You say the signal snafu is the least of our worries. What's this piece focused on, and how can we communicate this to more people who are still stuck in this idea that Trump is somehow a peace president?
Yeah, so this was actually a video I intended to film, and I just didn't get around to it. So I wanted to say it. It's basically a compilation of the very numerous ways that Trump was never a peace president. He is still not a peace president. It ends on something that really grinds my gears that I'll touch on here, which is people love to say, like, no new wars. There were no new wars when Donald Trump was president the first time. And first of all, he continued every single war. So, like, cool that he didn't start a new one, but he actually ramped up bombings. I think definitely in Somalia. I'm not sure if he had more than Obama in Yemen, but he continued to bomb Yemen, which he's doing now. They've already bombed Somalia this term. The number of civilian casualties that went up in Afghanistan his first term were astronomical. And they removed safeguards for civilians. I think now they've I think in the first administration, you'll have to fact check me on this. I think in the first administration, they stopped doing some reporting requirements within the rules of government. And I think they've taken even further measures now. And of course, they cloak it in national security and, just being responsible and taking care of the country. But this is it's so easily verifiable. And when people say no new wars, even less about Trump, this is such a statement on the broader empire, that the people of the empire are so tolerant of the empire that to them, peace means not starting a new war. Like, never forget that, like, the military budget keeps going up. Forget that the bombings continued. Like, never mind all that. He didn't end a single war. As far as I know, did he end one? I'm not aware of one. No. But to me, it just shows, like, the relative. No,
he didn't end anything. You're correct on that, and you're also correct that he got rid of the drone reporting requirement, and so he increased drones like beyond Obama, and then got rid of that requirement. So we actually don't even know how many he really did. Yeah, but continue.
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing, which is really interesting to me, is that when Congress finally acted to try to restrict U.S. involvement in Yemen, he vetoed it. And his justification was that it would undermine his power too much. And now he's looking at another Saudi arms deal, and the Saudis are the ones leading the war there. So it's business as usual, and it's people love to be like, well, Obama did it first, to which it's like, do you think that's a good retort, that you're saying that someone you view as a tyrant, as a corrupt authoritarian, they had the same policy as your guy? Like, that's not, to me, that is not the winning argument. You think it is?
No, and it's also, to me, whenever I hear things like that, I just realize how low the bar has gotten. Like, it's just like, well, at least he's not as bad as the other guy. And there's always been a little bit of that, like this left-right thing that so many people, again, like another issue where I'm like, I thought we got past this 10 years ago. And then just, Trump came around and broke a bunch of people's brains. But yeah, I see that same thing. Well, there's so many of these illogical arguments that really get us nowhere. Why, Carrie, do you think it's so difficult to get people to care about war? Like, I mean, there was a reasonable effort, I think, a couple of years ago with the Rage Against the War machine rally. And I wouldn't say I agreed with everybody that was a part of it, but it was a general effort, to bring left, right, progressive, et cetera, kind of libertarians together. But it wasn't like a huge success, I would say. I mean, it was out there. They did their thing. Good for them. There weren't millions of people there. There weren't hundreds of thousands of people there. Now, and the other thing, and maybe it's just a level of desensitizing to it, because we can look on any news feed and see dead Palestinian kids and dead Yemeni children. And, and that's just in that particular area, we could go on. And these things just scroll by in the feed and people see them and then kind of like maybe give it a like or a heart and then move on. And it really saddens me to think that we're 60 years out from some of the, 60 years out, but even just going back to post 9/11, massive anti-war marches against Iraq, like, so 20 years, 60 years, like, away from these massive movements. And it doesn't seem like it's an issue too many people care about now. And I think it does go back to the whole spiritual thing. But what are your thoughts on that?
I have a couple. Well, I actually have many, but I'm going to forget them. And so I'm just going to go on the ones that are sticking out to me most. I think one is that it doesn't touch us very much here. We're pretty insulated from the realities of war. Back in Vietnam, more people were getting drafted. It was a lot more, there was a lot more personal reason for people to oppose and question the war. So there's that. And I think too, obviously the way the media reports it, in my understanding of history, I studied history in college. During Vietnam, more of the war was reported. People were actually seeing more of the carnage. I don't know to what extent, like, I don't know if they were seeing actual blown up children, but there was more journalism was actually covering it. And then the Pentagon papers came out. But then fast forward to the Afghanistan papers that came out that showed the Department of Defense had been lying about what was going on in Afghanistan for years, possibly the duration of the war. And who cares? And I think nothing has changed in terms of people's acceptance of statism, but I think that when people accept that violence is an acceptable form or acceptable way to organize society, and if maybe they may not even be conscious of it, I find most people are not aware of it. If you say the government is violent, they're like, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Like it's, and that's a whole. I have a lot of videos on this. If you're curious, you can watch my videos. We don't need to get into a whole philosophical explainer on that, but I think it's a lot more tolerable when you think that these are people in uniform. They have a right to do that, and then when you're propagandized into being afraid, fearing the terrorists, viewing them as the other, or viewing civilians who happen to live in the same geographical area where terrorists live, it seems okay. Like it seems more permissible. But I think that comes down to a spiritual thing as well, to be able to tolerate violence against innocent people and be able to just push it aside because, well, there might be a bad guy there, so it's okay. And that makes me feel safer, so it's fine. Yeah, it really does. I feel like that's one of the things that when I let myself, which is not something I always want to do, but I also feel like it's important to take stock of what's really going on and occasionally allow yourself to really feel that, like you said, the injustices and just it's not about taking sides in any particular conflict, because dead children at the end of the day, because of somebody's bomb coming from taxpayers, is not really helping anybody. It's not freeing anybody. It's not leading to any positive consequences. But when I allow myself to really feel those things, yeah, it's tough because I do feel like there is just a lack of effort. There's clearly people out there doing their best and they're trying, but these people, like for example, I just saw a video go by today on Twitter of some young student confronting Alex Karp of Palantir, Peter Thiel's co-CEO there, at some speech he was giving. And, she just had her 30 seconds of yelling, you're supporting genocide and this and that before the police came and, of course, took her away. And I wish we had more of that. I wish there was just more of that kind of energy, that these sort of people who are billionaires, and then the reality is they're very much close to the Trump administration, are able to just walk around. I'm not saying they should have harm caused them, but they definitely should be getting confronted, or at the least maybe some reality checks here and there. I think that would be useful and valuable if these kind of people didn't feel like they could just continue to not only profit and, make ridiculous amounts of money, but walk around freely and then be celebrated as heroes, which is sort of how they are in many corners. So yeah, it really sucks. It's definitely not anything we're going to solve here today, but I wish that we could have more energy and effort into that. And I don't claim to have the answers on how to make that happen. We've of course tried to organize events and things, and it's tough to motivate people, to rally people together. Like you said, I think the big thing is that people don't see it and feel it day to day. And I've seen this during the election, that some people, they're like, okay, maybe RFK is a Zionist, maybe Trump is a Zionist, maybe Kamala is a Zionist too, maybe they're all Zionists, but at least this Zionist is saying that my food's going to be a little cheaper at home. Like, people are kind of, which I understand on a certain level, but if it's something in the domestic front is going to get fixed, then I'll ignore some of those other fucked up things going on over there. Yeah. And I get it in one level, but I just wish we could have more of that compassion in that area. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a testament to what a failure the system is, that people are so concerned about just getting by, that the dollar is so devalued, that food is so expensive, that the housing markets are so, how do people live? It's like they really don't have time to be stressed about what's going on overseas. And I do empathize with that. I totally understand, but I also think it's related. The amount of spending that goes into the war machine. I mean, Trump has promised $1 trillion military budget, which is, it's been inching toward that. Like, it's not that insane. It's kind of like, of course, it's not like we're going from 100 billion to $1 trillion. It was like 850 or something around there last year. So it's not a huge increase, but I mean, that's a lot of resources going to bomb people and to the military industrial contractors. And it's, to me, it makes no difference what color team is sending out those contracts and empowering those people. But again, if you're focused on putting food on the table and taking care of your kids, it's not going to be number one on your list of priorities.
You're right. It is all interrelated in the way these systems work. And if people are, too busy trying to make it check to check and put food on the plate, they don't have much time for going to an anti-war rally, let alone, doing anything beyond just taking care of their own family. I wanted to also highlight another one I found you put a few weeks back, is the CIA finally going down. And this one, the reason I wanted to just point out this one is because I hadn't seen anybody else talk about this particular nomination that you're focused on. And I think it is an important one, obviously the CIA. But tell us about this one and what caught your eye and what sort of fun stuff we're in store for under Trump's CIA director.
Yeah, so CIA Director John Ratcliffe is very much a Trump loyalist. And I believe he was Director of National Intelligence in the first term, and he was very loyal to Trump. And I'm not surprised that he was chosen because despite all the, there was a lot of MAGA hope or like libertarian MAGA hope that, we're going to abolish the CIA for sure. That's going to happen because they're out to get Trump. And so he's going to shut him down. Like, no, he wants that power for himself. And so he appointed a loyalist. But what's interesting is that when Ratcliffe, between these two offices and between administrations, he did a lot of work for AI companies, artificial intelligence companies. And I don't personally believe that artificial intelligence on its face as a whole is wrong and evil. However, when harnessed by the killing machines and by the government, like, I'm not cool with that. I do not trust those people to use that responsibly. So he was invested in a lot of companies. He says that I think, got rid of his shares or whatever, but he brings that mentality to the CIA. And the CIA was already engaging in using artificial intelligence. And from my understanding, that's going to be something that he focuses on more. And then add in the fact that, like everyone else who's big Zionist, he actually worked in the Bush administration. And I think he lied about some of his accomplishments, which I'm not sure I would call them accomplishments, but there were accusations he had made things up and embellished. Like, this is the standard of character, which is not unique to Trump. I don't want to sound like this is new to Donald Trump. It's not at all. And the Intercept article that I first read about this and even noted, like, this is just standard form in Washington and these appointments. But I found it interesting that there wasn't a nomination battle for him or a confirmation battle. He sailed through pretty handily. Like, it wasn't 100%, but it wasn't like the battle that RFK Jr. and Gabbard went through. This was very much more an establishment pick. And I think I just saw recently that he had met with someone in Israel, possibly Netanyahu, but definitely Israel. And of course, another interesting thing too is I think the CIA invested along with a lot of investment firms in an Israeli tech company called Kela. I think it's Kela, that formed after October 7th. So it's very much like a warfare company, but there's such an enmeshment between tech and the CIA, and then also Israeli tech and their intelligence, and it's hard to fathom. But it's just interesting that there's been such little focus on him, especially when the CIA is kind of like the quintessential deep state agency.
Well, I think you said it there about why there hasn't been much resistance to it, because he is an establishment candidate. And again, for those who don't get it yet, both sides support the CIA, both sides support. This is the sort of establishment that both corporate parties can get behind. And it's unfortunate, but it's not surprising. And the AI, which you mentioned there, I mean, yeah, AI itself is a tool. It can be used for all kinds of useful, time-saving things. But when you're seeing the CIA, and I just put out a new article yesterday at the Last American Vagabond about the DOD and NATO partnering with Palantir, because after Google gave up on Project Maven, once the walkout from back in 2018, which actually I found one of your old articles from back then talking about that, Palantir was kind enough to step in and pick up the contract and continue. They said, we don't have a problem with building, AI to target people with drones. We'll go ahead and do that. And so in the hands of these people, it's very worrisome. And when you have somebody, like you said, Ratcliffe, he's just right along with the agenda. And I thought there was going to be an abolishment of the FBI. I thought that was supposed to be coming. I thought we were supposed to be getting rid of the IRS and all kinds of fun things. But unfortunately, none of that stuff is going to happen. And I can't believe anybody even thought for a moment that that was on the table. But here we are. You know, you reminded me of, because we've mentioned Zionism a couple times now. And I remember you did a video years back. Like, I think it was titled "How I Became a Self-Hating Jew." Is that correct? Yeah.
That's correct.
Talk about, you know, I don't even think, I mean, besides the video, like, talk about your Jewish heritage, if you will, and like what the video is about, and sort of how you feel now, like with October 7th being a couple years past now, and just the increase in anti-Semitism being, that label being used on campuses now to deport people. And then the HHS under RFK saying anti-Semitism is a public health emergency. And I mean, it's crazy the amount of ways that this phrase is being used to really silence people. But yeah, what's been your perspective? Have you seen anti-Semitism like directed at you? I'm sure you have, because there are actual bigots out there. But yeah, what is your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to get too scattered, because I feel like I have a million thoughts on this and a million different, like, I've written out so many videos that I haven't filmed yet. So yeah, my mom is Jewish. My grandparents were raised Orthodox Jewish. Like, I think you can tell from looking at me, like, I'm for sure part Jewish, and my other side isn't Jewish at all. Wedler is a very German name, which is a funny, like, mix to have, like German and Jewish. But I was not raised really with a lot of dogmatism for Israel. Thank God. My mom was more of an independent thinker than that, and she had a lot of criticisms of Israel when I was growing up. So I'm grateful that I was at least exposed. I wasn't exposed to like the rabid, just blind support for Israel. But I think one of the biggest problems, well, actually, for sure, there's anti-Semitism. Some of the emails and comments I've gotten over the years are like, and I oppose the state of Israel, and yet I still get these comments. So it's not just about criticizing Israel and or just hating Jews. I'm not sure that makes sense, honestly, what I was just trying to say. But what I was trying to say is that what's really difficult to watch is that most Jewish people have some kind of trauma in their history. They have some family story of how their family was persecuted for being Jewish. And I can hear the anti-Semitism voice in my head of like, it's not because they were Jews, not just because they were Jewish, ruin cultures and destroy Western civilization, you know, but like know that I had family who they fled Russia. My grandma's side of the family, they came here because they fled Russia, and my grandpa's side of the family came here because they could see what was happening in Europe, and they're like, we got to get out now. And the ones who didn't leave, all of their sisters never heard from again after the early 1940s. Like, the letters stopped coming, they never found them. So the assumption is, well, they didn't make it. But I think what's really disgusting and really unforgivable, whether it's conscious or not, I don't want to say unforgivable because I believe in forgiveness and redemption, but what's really disturbing is that trauma has been exploited to justify the state of Israel and to justify such horrific crimes and such dehumanization. The way I see Zionists talk about Palestinian children, not even just Palestinian civilians, children. I mean, I have empathy for them, because like, what a horrible way to live. Like, you must be so brainwashed and so caught in fear that that's how you view your fellow human beings. It's just sad to watch, because it was real. The Jewish people, like a lot of other groups, have gone through. That's the other thing, is there's like this Jewish suffering exceptionalism of like, no one's had it as bad as us, and like like a lot of people have suffered, and it's usually at the hands of governments throughout the years. But of course, that's not part of the conversation, because the vast majority of the world is not anarchist or voluntarist. So it's really hard to watch that conflation of Jews with the state of Israel, and they exploit that so hard. I mean, I think Norman Finkelstein wrote a book called like The Holocaust Industry or Holocaust Inc., which I have not read, but he's another Jew who gets a lot of flack for speaking out against the state of Israel. But to me, it comes down, the two key components here are the trauma, the exploitation of the trauma, and the conflation of being Jewish with the state of Israel, which we see is very much happening with the Trump regime. It's like anti-Semitism is more or less, it can be counted as just criticizing the state of Israel. And
it's a powerful weapon. It is one that they definitely love to wield. And it's funny you say that. I mean, that's why I knew that you had real, I don't even like to use the term anti-Semites because of how just convoluted the term is, but you've had real bigots in your emails and comments, because I get them too. I've been, in the last 3 weeks, I've been accused of being Jewish. I'm not Jewish, but yeah, because I'm writing the Pyramid of Power, and I mentioned like, hey, give me your best sources on It's the Jews, because I'm willing to look down any rabbit hole. I'll go check out, and I also want to debunk bullshit that's out there too. So just by asking that question and maybe kind of saying, what I posted was, what if blaming everything on the Jews is a psyop? And that just, kicked the hornet's nest of people who were like, well, of course, because you're Jewish and just whatever. So yeah, there's idiots out there. There's legitimate idiots. And I'm sure some of them are real people. I'm sure some of them are bots, for sure, that are just kind of out there boosting that signal to sort of, I don't know, my conspiratorial mind would say, hey, wouldn't you, if you wanted to use anti-Semite, that term as a label to kind of stigmatize people and now arrest them and penalize them, maybe it would play in your favor if you had bots on the internet saying anti-Semitic stuff and spreading that around. But nevertheless, yeah, it's just crazy to see that particular label used. And I think you're also right about not just with the Jewish people, but definitely that community, broadly speaking, and a lot of human beings use their victim mentality as like as a security blanket, and that becomes part of their identity. And it definitely is something that I think some people in the Jewish community have picked up or were taught, was kind of encoded into them. But it's great to hear that that's not something that was part of your story.
Yeah, but I think that is such a huge piece of it, because it's like you take the trauma and then you insert the falsehood that the Israeli state is here to protect you, to give your people a safe home. So when you grow up, for a lot of Jews, there is a big victimhood mentality. Like we were and like, I get it. Of course, people went through really horrific things, like in many places around the world. So I don't want to diminish that. Like, I'm sure that intergenerational trauma has been passed down to me, like through my maternal side, like I don't want to act like that's not real, but to then turn that into statism, like that piece of the statism is so essential here, because it's one thing to acknowledge that your family has been through trauma and the religion you subscribe to, the ethnicity. I don't even know what the Jews are, honestly, but like, what I don't know. I was not raised religious or like with a lot of Jewish education, and I'm grateful for that. My parents just let me be and like raised me to be kind and loving and like a good person. But that's a tangent. Like what was I saying? Oh my God.
Well, that the Jews and the victim mentality, something about the Jews, the victim mentality.
Yeah, no, but like it's one thing to acknowledge that trauma and to honor it. It's another thing to then be a statist, and it's someone's fault that they're a statist. Like they're victims of programming. But when those two things intersect, it's extremely toxic, and we see it happening right now. The things that people will excuse, in the name of feeling safe. And it comes back to that fear. People feel really afraid, and they want daddy government to make them feel like it's okay. They don't have to be so anxious. They don't have to be so scared. Yeah, and the sad thing about that whole conversation is that for the people who think everything is the Jews' fault in different ways, and again, there's like a extreme caricature of that where like I've seen it online. Somebody will just like you post an article about anything, and they're going to go search the article, and if there's a Jewish last name, like, yep, knew it. Of course, they're Jew. That's all they can see. Yeah. But because of this push for the anti-Semitism, all it does is reinforce that narrative for a lot of people. They're like, well, why can't I question Israel if they're not in control? If it's not the Jews in control, well, they sure have a lot of power, which absolutely, there's no controversial statement about that. There are powerful people of Jewish descent. And like you said, it's hard to even know what that means, right? Are we talking about a religious Jewish person or somebody who's ethnically Jewish, or because there's, it's a whole thing. But so I appreciate you sharing some of that. I did want to highlight one more of your pieces here on Substack. You kind of already started to talk about this one, but I do want to encourage people to really look at your whole Substack. But this one, a lesser known story of settled science and the experts getting it wrong. And so obviously you're picking up there on the thread of trust the science that we've all heard for the last 5 years plus. But even before that, I was writing articles for the anti-media about fluoride 10 years ago. And finally, we've got like a national conversation, maybe not in the best way, but it's out there, right? And so there's plenty of topics like this. But I think this one is also focused on neuroplasticity, right? Is that right? Yeah.
So tell us more about, you kind of went through some of this already, but what made you want to focus on it for this particular? I think you're trying to get people to realize their brains are more powerful than they've been taught, right?
Yeah. And I think it's also just challenging the dogma of blind adherence to science, which, science is really cool. There's a lot of great stuff science has discovered, but with the capital S, it gets a little dogmatic. And I learned this. So when I first started my rewiring program, one of the books recommended is called The Brain That Changes Itself. And I ended up reading another book. I think it's on my stack right here. It's called Train Your Mind. It's either Train Your Mind, Change Your Brain, or Change Your it's one of those. If you look up that, you'll find the correct wording. But both of these books, which I read earlier on in the program, talked about how neuroplasticity was discovered. And it goes so far back, there wasn't really malice on anyone's part. It's just originally scientists, as far back as like 1600 with Descartes, the belief was that the brain was more like a machine, and machines have parts that don't change. They're very immutable characteristics about the brain. And so that was the model for understanding the human brain. It's a machine. And that dogma really prevented people from being able to even acknowledge the science when more renegade scientists started to experiment, and they started to find that actually the brain can change. And it first started, there was an acknowledgement that, well, okay, children do have neuroplasticity, but for decades, I think I wrote this article a few months ago, so I've been all over the world, so I'm not sure the exact details. You can read the article because I very meticulously went through this one and checked my sources, but eventually they started to discover that actually adults also have neuroplasticity, and that was met with such hostility in the scientific community because it was running up against centuries of biases. And eventually what's really cool is one of the researchers who first discovered this, who's really helped people. He's invented really powerful, I think he helped develop the cochlear implant, or he was somewhere adjacent to that. And he did it through realizing and understanding neuroplasticity, but he was met with like just insults. And eventually over time, the expert scientists eventually acknowledged they were wrong. And they acknowledged his research, and they were like, whoops, sorry about that. Which is, the article was not written to demonize science. It's just to say, like, well, part of the scientific process is questioning things. And I think that science can be propped up so high, it becomes immune from questioning or immune to questioning. And then things fall by the wayside. So for decades, there were researchers saying, no, the human brain can change even as an adult. And they were ignored because it didn't fit into the, quote, settled science. And given that I'm rewiring my brain and I'm watching my body change as a result of doing this brain rewiring and harnessing neuroplasticity, it was just very interesting to me. And I think, as the title says, a lesser known example of when science gets a little bit arrogant.
Yeah. And again, we can all reflect on times we've seen that happen. And I think that was ultimately what most people were trying to say during COVID, which is why it was so stupid to be labeled anti-science, because nobody was trying to say, like, we hate science. Maybe some people were, I don't know, there's extremists out there, but the general population was just saying, I think a lot of questions are being ignored. I think these group of people who are asking certain questions about the shots or the various practices, they're just being called crazy. And yeah, like it was this whole thing of what we're all supposed to just, science speaks in one uniform voice and there's, no room for questioning, but that's not how science works. And so it's important to just identify different stories like that. I mean, the same thing could be said to what we were talking about with psychedelics. I mean, people were studying psychedelics. All of their studies weren't super sound in the 50s, but they had done them early in the 50s and 60s and showed at least there's something else here to look into. But instead, the drug war and other, interests shut that down. And now it's like, okay, we're having a sort of a resurgence and understanding that again and learning that again. It just happens often. I think that's just, I don't want to think it's the nature of science. I think it's more the nature of centralization and of humans coming together and then conflicts of interest, et cetera. Like somebody doing pure science in their, their lab or their garage, maybe has no reason to shy away from the truth. But then once money gets involved, once government gets involved, of course, and other things, then there's clearly interests that don't want us to have certain health remedies, whether they're mental, physical, spiritual remedies that could hurt their bottom line or just, create a more empowered humanity. And yeah, we end up with that trust the science. So I appreciate you putting that one together. You mentioned that you're working on some new videos. Before we wrap up, could you share any of what you're working on?
Yeah, for sure. So I just filmed one. A lot of what I like to do is take popular narratives or my brain wants to call them NPC, but that's rude. But like just this like standard knee-jerk responses from people who are still very much tied into the system. I like to take those retorts and break them down and debunk them. So I just filmed one on it would be worse with Kamala. So I just filmed that one. And what did I film? I also wanted to revisit a video I made a while back about legality versus morality, because a lot of what I see from the right-wing MAGA crowd is very much like, well, it's bad because it's illegal. Illegal leaks and illegal drugs and illegal immigrants. And there's this fixation on like the government says it's bad. So I broke that down. I love going through history, and that's a really easy one to make, honestly. And a lot of people have made this argument, but it just seems quite relevant now. And I found another one for liberals and Democrats and their resistance to Donald Trump. Because I think that I've been going pretty hard on the Trump administration because there's so much to talk about and there's so much that needs to be addressed. But I think I'm from LA. I live in LA. I talk to a lot of like liberals and Democrats, and there seems to be this belief that like Trump is ruining everything, that it was all kind of working okay until Trump came in and he's broken our system. And so it's kind of, there's always an anarchist element to what I talk about. And the one I still need to film is about the most dangerous minority, which it's not the Jews, which actually leads into a question I know you wanted to ask me, but yeah, it's the government, it's the ruling class. So I like doing little bait and switch things, which is a little rude, a little sassy, but I find it's good to suck people in and then kind of surprise them. Or at least I like to do it, and it sometimes resonates with people. So there's just so much, like, it's the Jews, it's the Jesuits, it's the blacks. See, there's so much racism that I think I've never seen it like this before. And my guess is it was always kind of lurking there. And the Trump era just gave people permission to be more open about it, which I don't know. That's neutral to me, because if it was always lurking, I'm not sure if it's good or bad that it's more on the surface now. I don't know. I don't have a judgment on that, but there's so much blame and there's so much collectivization and there's so much othering that I just wanted to point out my perspective, that the most dangerous minority in terms of violence and killing people, and I have a whole list. I won't give away too much of the video, but it's the government.
Those all sound really useful. And what I love about your videos is that they're usually, fairly short, and they're just succinct. I know you put a lot of time and energy and effort into writing them and then filming them and everything. And the ones that I find really useful are like those very specific memes, like you said, oh, well, it would have been worse with Kamala, because then you can just, like, when somebody says that online, you just pull out Carrie's video and respond with that and then let them watch that. Yeah, those are useful. I mean, I think that's really where when I'm creating content, whether it's an article or some other form, like, it is very much with that in mind, that I think that those of us who choose to take on those roles as content creators, journalists, activists, et cetera, I believe at least it's important to create content that is useful for people in that way. Sometimes maybe you just want to go down a rabbit hole of whatever and explore some topic that's fun to you, and that's fine as well. But I do think what's most impactful is when people have these little, whether it's a documentary or a book or a 5-minute video, to then share, because when they're out there in the wilds of the internet having their debates and their arguments, they run into these same things that we see everywhere, and they can just refer back to those the different pieces of content and use them as a way, like, maybe if they're not the best with formulating their arguments, but they agree with what you said, but you said it way better than I can say it. So I think that's really useful. Like, that's the part of the information war, which I think we definitely are in some ideological battle here, good ideas versus bad ideas. That is very, it's a useful tool. So thanks for all you do on that front, and for writing again, because I do enjoy reading your writing, and I think more people find it useful as well. You can find Carrie, everybody, at Substack, Pleasure to Burn. I'll put the links in the show notes, of course, and some of the videos we referenced there. Any other closing thoughts, Carrie? What are you thinking for the rest of 2025? Are you going to be following the news closely and stressing out at every development, or are you going to focus on yourself?
Oh, I think I got to do both, because it's funny, because when I step away for too long, that doesn't feel good either. Like, it doesn't feel good to be disengaged. So I'm going to be trying to find my balance and trying to find a way to make videos that, like, I do a lot of video editing. If you've seen my videos, I do all of that myself. I don't have a video editor, so I actually would like to get a video editor. But I'm trying to find ways to make easier content that don't just burn me out and zap me to make them. But I also really love video editing, so I got some stuff to figure out. But I intend to still be making content and, saying the things that I think are relevant and that matter, and trying to cut through what I think is just static and propaganda on both sides, all sides. So that's my plan.
Awesome, Carrie. And I'd love to have you on one of the upcoming Independent Media Alliance panels that we do this year, because we consider you to be a member of that. We're all so busy doing our different things, but I love getting the different perspectives and us teaming up. And there's going to be some more news on that front soon. So I'd love to have you jump in one of the panels where it fits for you.
Yeah, I'd love that.
All right. Well, everybody, please do check out Carrie's work. She's been out there doing the good work for a long time. And I really, besides the other people, pretty much everybody in the Independent Media Alliance is there because they still have a brain and they are principled. And that includes Carrie. And it sometimes feels like there's less and less people that you can rely on. Like when somebody asks me, Derrick, who would you recommend to follow? There's not always a big list that I can say these days for various reasons. And Carrie, you're one of those people. So I do really greatly appreciate everything you do out there for liberty and for humanity and for yourself, because I know that's part of the effort as well. So thank you guys for tuning in, everybody. Check out the show notes, check out Carrie's work. And until next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace. Thank you for listening to the Activation Podcast. You can find the archives to our show at SoulStream, Pinecast, Spotify, and theconsciousresistance.com. Thank you for listening.